So a little bit about myself. I have been with the Michigan State Police now for 18 years. I am currently assigned to our Missing Persons Unit, which started back in 2014. And I'm one of 3 members of that kind of small unit within our agency. So we handle all missing adult investigations, missing children investigations, human trafficking presentations like today, and we handle the Amber Alert in our unit. So I'm the state Amber Alert coordinator, and my partner Jolene, who I work with, is our state missing children's clearinghouse manager. So those are 2 state-appointed positions. And I'm also a 3rd-generation police officer.
Ooh.
So my grandfather worked at Grosse Pointe Farms PD. My father was a sergeant with the Michigan State Police up in the Thumb. And then I started 18 years ago and have served at the Richmond post, the Detroit post, and I'm currently assigned to our headquarters in Lansing. So I also like to hear where people are from, so it was nice to hear that we have different communities here. And I'll try to reflect on maybe some cases that I had within your communities that we could talk about. So I heard that somebody here is from Monroe.
Yes. Tressa.
Yes, Tressa.
She's presented.
Tressa Duffin and I work together closely because
Yes.
she's our human trafficking expert.
We support her human trafficking in
So-
our exchange club does. So,
Yep.
yes.
So Tressa and I know each other very well, and my husband is also from Monroe.
Okay.
So born and raised in well, I shouldn't say born and raised, but he wasn't born there, but he grew up in Monroe. His father is still a physician in the city.
Okay.
So Dr. Qureshi.
Okay. All right.
So let's get right into the human trafficking part of this. I'm going to talk a little bit about the elements that go into a human trafficking case. That's more on the law enforcement side, so I'm going to try to hit on both sides so you understand what we as law enforcement officers need to make a human trafficking case, and then what the community kind of thinks human trafficking is. Because there's a lot of myths going on out there. And I'm sure some of you are maybe a little bit confused by what is human trafficking and is it impacting your community or not. So we'll go over kind of the elements of it. So human trafficking really means that there is an action taking place, and that is usually in the form of recruiting a member, harboring a trafficking person. It doesn't essentially mean moving, and when people hear trafficking, I think that they think that the person has to move. And that doesn't have to be an element of it. I also want to tell you that a bunch of people in the back of a semi-truck is not human trafficking. That's called human smuggling. And there's a big difference between the two. But really, the trafficking part of it means that they're obtaining a person to use for the means of human trafficking. The means is always going to be by fraud, force, or coercion. We have to prove one of those 3 elements in it. And usually the purpose of trafficking that person is either for commercial sex, a commercial sex act, a debt bondage, or involuntary servitude. So it doesn't always have to be a sex crime that's involved for human trafficking. It can be somebody is being placed in a position where they're forced to work many hours without pay. And that could be another form of human trafficking. So there's really 2 different types. There's the commercial sex acts, and then there's labor trafficking. And the labor trafficking you see more in the migrant communities, in the ethnic community. And then you see the commercial sex acts pretty much across the board. And sometimes they're combined. And we'll see both. We'll see labor and sex trafficking in the same case. So a little bit about the fraud or the force used. The force is usually something that the trafficker is using to break the victim's resistance. So these people are not completely voluntarily doing this. However, I will say that a lot of the cases will have a voluntary aspect to it. And a lot of our victims that we see getting into human trafficking at first do volunteer for it. So maybe they kind of sign up for this idea that they're going to get paid for a sex act, which at first is okay with them. And that's the sad reality of a lot of our sex trafficking victims, is that they enter the bargain voluntarily. And at some point that shifts and it becomes a compact that they can't exit out of. So just so you know, and that's sometimes a lot of shame is brought on the families of human trafficking victims because of that, but that is a very sad reality of it, is I would say most of, especially our sex trafficking victims, do enter the sex trafficking world voluntarily at first. So, but at some point that there has to be a force to keep that person in it. And a lot of times that is brought to them by some sort of fraud. So a lot of what I see are, especially with the girls that are involved in sex trafficking, is that they are offered kind of a deal from their trafficker. And what I call this is being boyfriended in. So a lot of times the girls get into it because of a relationship with the trafficker. So they believe that this is their boyfriend and that he loves them and that he's taking care of them, and that's why they are doing these acts on behalf of the trafficker. But at some point that changes and they realize that this is actually not what they thought it was, and that's where the fraud comes in. And then coercion. So coercion is really a scheme or a plan to keep that victim involved in it. And what the great thing about coercion is it's very hard to prove. However, we just passed a law here in Michigan allowing that keeping a victim drug-induced, if we can prove that element, that can be a part of the coercion. So coercion by drugs. And that is about 90% of the cases that we're seeing. So a lot of the girls that are involved, especially in the sex trafficking, are kept in that habit because they have a habit. And their trafficker is keeping them contained because they're also their drug dealer. So they're giving them the drugs that keeps them involved in the sex trafficking, and they just can't work their way out of it. So trafficking by coercion, so to prove that element, the fact that now we can prove it by just having a drug involved in it and that the trafficker is giving it to our victim, that's a very easy thing for law enforcement to prove. So we can take that and get prosecution based on coercion by drugs. So that's a huge element that is helping us in law enforcement, that we now have that. So you might want to ask, who are these victims? Who gets involved in sex trafficking? I can tell you for a fact that it is across the board, any race, any ethnic background, any age, pretty much everybody could be a victim of sex trafficking. The number one thing I see though is that these people are vulnerable. So it's not to say that everybody in here, your grandchildren or your children or your neighbors are gonna be involved in it. It's not like that. The traffickers look for vulnerable people. So if you know somebody that's vulnerable, they could absolutely be a victim of sex trafficking. We do not see a lot of people that get involved in this, be the valedictorian at a high school that has a lot of goals, but they could be. But those are the people on the high end of the scale that the trafficker's not going to deal with them. They're going to look for the low-hanging fruit. They're going to look for the girls that are runaways, that are foster kids, that are coming from broken homes, that want to be loved. Those are the ones that they're looking for. But absolutely, I've seen youth, adults of every age, every color, every religion. It doesn't really matter. As long as they're vulnerable, those traffickers can get their hooks involved. We do see, especially in sex trafficking, more girls than boys, for sure. However, that's not to say that a boy couldn't be involved. But when we do see boys involved, usually they are transgendered, gay, or extremely vulnerable boys. We don't see, the captain of the football teams. We're not seeing them involved in it. However, we're seeing them sometimes involved as the traffickers. So traffickers, the same thing, crosses all ethnicities, all races, all religions, and genders. We even see women be traffickers. We see parents trafficking their children. So that again can cross all borders. So this is kind of a crime that is happening everywhere, but I want you to really understand who it's happening to. Does Michigan have an issue? How many people in here have heard that Michigan is number 2 in the nation in sex trafficking? How many of you believe that? I would too. It's on the news all the time, right? It's always being pushed. We're number 2, we're number 2. We're actually not number 2 and we never have been. So I can explain exactly why they say that. Back 10 years or so ago when we really first started working sex trafficking, this is like 2006, 2007, we had a team, and we still do, down in Detroit, which Tressa Duffin is actually assigned to now. It's called SEMTEC. And it's the Southeast Michigan Trafficking and Exploitation Crime Unit. It's run by the FBI. It involves a lot of different law enforcement agencies across the Detroit area. They started picking up that this was a problem, especially down in Southeast Michigan. So they created this team to start combating sex trafficking. Every year the FBI runs a sting that's called Operation Cross Country, where all of these units that the FBI runs, all on the same weekend, have Operation Cross Country, where for 3 days straight, they try to rescue victims of sex trafficking. Of course, if you know anything about law enforcement, we compete. We're pretty, it's like a sports team. So you have all these FBI teams, and there's only about 12 or 13 of them across the nation that have these exploitation crime teams. So not every FBI office has them, not even every state. But the 12 or 13 teams that were competing for that weekend, Detroit came in number 2 because we were awesome at rescuing victims. Yeah. And really, that's what that meant. We rescued the most victims. We were the number 2 agency that year. Miami got first, we got second. And that got transmitted to the media as Michigan is the worst. We're number 2 in the nation for sex trafficking. Which, do you get it now? Yeah. We're the best at fighting it, but we became the second worst in the country, and that has stuck ever since. And the media took it and ran it, even though we try to explain it away. Sometimes the drama in media is more important than the truth. Yeah. So I don't want to use the fake news, but yeah, fake news happened way back then. And I fight that every day. In every community that I talk to, there's still people that are like, we're number 2, and they'll fight me on it. And I was there, I know. So we're not number 2, but we are in like the top 20. So usually we're between 7 and 15 every year. And every year it changes, obviously it changes. But I think with this year we were like number 11 in the nation. So we still have a problem, right? That's still pretty high. 50 states and we're number 11. Yeah, we have a problem, but it's not the worst. The worst is usually, who do you think would be the worst?
Texas.
Georgia,
Texas.
Come on, the Sin City.
California.
Las Vegas. Yes, Las Vegas is usually one of the worst. Las Vegas and Miami. And I think that those are just 2 very dynamic cities. A lot of people go there to party, and that's really what brings especially sex trafficking there. Labor trafficking is extremely different, as you can already see. There's very different elements involved. And who said Texas? Yeah, so labor trafficking is probably higher in Texas than in Las Vegas, but sex trafficking is definitely number 1 in Las Vegas. So Michigan does have an issue. We consider ourselves a hub state, and what is a hub? A hub just means that the traffickers, they move their people, and they only do that because they want to keep the market fresh. So they will take their girls and they will actually jump from hub city to hub city. So they're going from Atlanta to Chicago to Detroit to New York. And a lot of that is because they want to lie low from law enforcement. They don't want to have the same girls in the same spot all the time because that's how you get caught. And also they want to keep the market fresh, so they're moving their product around. As sad as that is, that it runs just like a business. And so these pimps and the traffickers will actually, when it kind of gets slow in an area, they pick up their operation, they move it elsewhere. And a lot of it is to avoid law enforcement detection. But Detroit is a major sports city, so most of the clientele in sex trafficking are men, which we call Johns. And so anytime you have a lot of sporting events, you have a lot of males that are coming in on business or for a good time, for like Las Vegas, you're gonna have sex trafficking. In Detroit, we have 4 major sports teams all in the same area. We have easy in, easy out of, international airport, so Detroit ends up being one of our larger hubs. We also have the auto shows. Everybody heard the auto show is big on sex trafficking. How many women go to auto show? Some, but is it a more male-dominated event? So it's just like a sports event. So we see a lot of men coming in for it. We also have a lot of sex trafficking in Flint, Grand Rapids, Lansing, Kalamazoo, but I have seen this everywhere. I have seen this in small town Kalkaska. I have seen this in coming out of Grand Traverse County. They don't want to ever talk about anything bad happens in their county, but this happens everywhere, and it affects all communities. So nobody can say that they don't have sex trafficking going on. Some considerations about, again, why Michigan does have a problem. We have over 3,900 missing people in our state. That is a true statistic. And most of those are missing juveniles. So the bulk of our missing persons are voluntary. So these are not all abducted people. Most of the people that go missing do go missing voluntarily, especially missing juveniles. So law enforcement takes over 1,000 missing juveniles a week in Michigan. That's a very real number. So just to kind of make it smaller for you, who in here is from Detroit? We got some Detroit people. The Detroit Police Department takes 16 to 20 reports a day of missing people. And just kind of talk a little bit about missing people, since that is my expertise. People go missing for every reason under the sun. So most of them are not foul play or endangerment situations. Most of the people that go missing either don't want to be accountable for whatever reason, don't want to follow rules, as are missing juveniles. A lot of people maybe just want to take a break from maybe a domestic situation that they're involved in at home. Maybe some sort of mental episode, they just need a break from life and they check out. So a lot of those cases that we're taking, those people come back the next day and they're just fine. So that is the reality of it. It's a revolving door of these people. Yes, we do have abduction cases that do occur, but it's less than 1% of our statistics. They're very, very rare, and that's why you don't hear of them all that often, but I will tell you that they do happen, but not at the rate that I think social media is telling you. So another myth, who has heard, especially on social media, that sex trafficking happens like at grocery stores, being followed by an ethnic-looking man? Maybe you're pumping gas and somebody is scoping you out, and you've seen those kind of viral posts going around on social media. Is anybody here on social media? Okay, so you've probably seen those. We have never had somebody abducted in our state for the purpose of sex trafficking. So a lot of those maybe feelings or fears about being followed and being captured by a trafficker, those are not happening. So sex trafficking doesn't happen that way. These traffickers are not looking for people on the streets to snatch. They are looking for vulnerable people online, people that they know, people that they become friends with, and then they groom them. So these are usually relationships that start and then move into a sex trafficking situation. Like I said, nobody has ever been snatched. So you do not have, not that you don't have to worry, everybody in here should keep their head on a swivel, but almost all of those cases where people felt like they were being followed could be explained by a purse snatching, a attempted larceny, maybe a carjacking. There's something else, and some of them are just a figment of their imagination. We debunked almost every viral post that happened in Michigan, and we found everything from the figments of imagination to one of them was a lady who was being followed by an ethnic man, and he was actually trying to get her to read his Bible. He was a religious fanatic, and that was his purpose, not to get her into the world of sex trafficking, but he was a common problem to the police agency there, and they knew exactly who that was when the description came out. So usually they are explainable. So the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children now reports that 1 in 7 juveniles become involved in sex trafficking while they're on their run. And remember how I said that a lot of our juvenile cases are those youth coming from broken homes, foster care situations, kids that don't want to follow rules. Those are vulnerable kids. So who do you think the sex traffickers are looking for? They're prime pickings for them. So you'll see a pretty high statistic in juvenile runaways that do get involved in sex trafficking, and that's completely explainable. So what are the traffickers looking for? Repeat runaways are probably our #1 red flag for sex trafficking. Why are they running away? Were they involved in it in the past? So if they have a history of being involved in it, usually they're going back to it if they're running away again. My #1 thing that I try to tell parents, if you have a child that has unexplained money or material items, the things I like to point out are if a girl is coming home and say she's 13, she has acrylic nails or shellac, she has eyelash extensions, she's got her hair done, getting extensions or braids or perms or any of that. The women in here, how much does that stuff cost? How much does shellac cost if you get it done every 2 weeks? $25. Yeah. So does this 13-year-old have funds to get that done? So if they're coming home with those type of material items, who is paying for that? And another big one is if they have a phone that is not under your plan. Does everybody in here know how much phones cost? How is this teenager paying for that? Those are questions that you should be asking. If you're an educator, if you're seeing that, if you're seeing a child that has all sorts of material items that they cannot afford. It doesn't mean it has to be sex trafficking. They could be a prime shoplifter, for sure. But it also could mean that they are getting gifts, and who are these gifts coming from? That is a sign of a trafficker. Traffickers often will gift children or the youth that they're trafficking monetary items. They're getting their nails done and they're getting their hair done because they want them to look good for their clients. So they're keeping them very, very well maintained. Especially these runaways. Runaways don't have any assets. They don't even have a bed to sleep in. So how are they looking that good? How do they have access to all these items? And it could be that a sex trafficker is involved. If you have a youth that has much older friends, and they're constantly hanging out with an older crowd, that could be another sign. A lot of the traffickers, there's a huge age gap between the people that they're trafficking and themselves. It doesn't mean that they're being sex trafficked, but it could be. This is just these red flags. Changes in behavior of, especially a youth, if they have a 180 in their personality and their online use. They go from being a very friendly, outgoing person to being very introverted and sheltered. The traffickers also like to take that child and completely envelop them where they're not communicating with their friends and family anymore. And that's a tactic that they use to keep them involved in the trafficking. So that could be a big red flag if you have somebody that completely does a 180 and all of a sudden you don't hear from them anymore. They're not hanging out with their friends anymore. They only hang out with a certain person. That could be a big red flag. A lot of the apps that are out there, and I'm not going to name them all, but be very cognizant what your children and youth are doing on their phones. Most of our sex trafficking, the recruitment happens online. So they're meeting these children and young people in chat rooms, even on apps that I think we use and we call safe, so like Facebook, Snapchat, the ones that are popular, even with adults. Those are grounds for traffickers. Anywhere that they can meet with youth outside of the public's view, it is a prime picking for trafficking. This is kind of on the law enforcement side. What do we look for? And this is more like if we're on a traffic stop. If we stop somebody and there was, say, a male or even a female, an adult driving with a bunch of youth, or even one youth in the car that is unrelated to them, and then we start seeing these type of things, multiple hotel room keys. Everybody has one from Holiday Inn today. These traffickers at times accumulate 10, 20, 30 of them at a time because they're moving from hotel to hotel and they're just stacking them up. So if you see multiple hotel room keys, that can be a sign. Any false IDs for the youth or lying about their age, they all lie about their age. They're always going to try to make themselves at an age appropriate for the trafficker. So you'll see them, they're obviously not 21 and they're saying they're 21 or 30 or whatever they're trying to lie about. Having large amounts of money, again, this doesn't have to mean they're involved in sex trafficking. They could be, again, a really good shoplifter or a drug dealer. But large amount of money, if the youth is a frequent runaway. So as law enforcement, when we run the people in the car, if we're running that youth and seeing that they have a bunch of runs on their record. So if you didn't know that, when a youth runs away and it gets reported to the police, we have a record of that. And it doesn't mean that they're in trouble. It can just show you that they've had repeated runs away from home. So actually we'll capture that. So we can see, are they a frequent runaway? A lot of times the victim of sex trafficking will be branded or tattooed by the trafficker. And that is really common for the trafficker, especially with tattooing, to put his or her name on them because they own them, right? At least that's what they think. So you will see usually the pimp or trafficker's name somewhere on their youth, or it could be a symbol. If there's multiple youth with the trafficker, they all could have the same symbol tattooed on them, and that's a definite sign. Inconsistencies in stories, they're never going to have their story straight. So when we stop them, usually we separate the two parties and start asking them questions. And if they don't match up, a lot of times there's a problem. Most of the youth that we encounter don't even know what city they're in. They have no idea. They didn't drive there, and they've been moved around so many times. We've even had youth that didn't know what state they were in, and no clue, because they had been continually picked up and moved from hotel to hotel to hotel, and they weren't even aware of what state they were in anymore. Again, the adult with minors unrelated, and any form of abuse, or you can see maybe injuries to the child that they can't explain. That could also be a sign of sex trafficking. A lot of our traffickers abuse their victims, and they're victims in more ways than one. But these girls suffer severe beatings at times from their pimp if they're not kept in line. It's a very abusive relationship. This is not a world that you would want anybody to live in. Where's the recruitment taking place? And at what age? Usually we see that it starts around the age of 16, but we've seen as low as 9. So that's very extreme, but we see sex traffickers start, as soon as they can traffic a victim, they will. And there's all sorts of markets out there, including sex with children. So we've seen everything, but usually the mean age is 16. The average life expectancy of one of these victims is only 7 years. In 7 years, usually ends by a drug overdose, a severe beating, so a homicide. Like I said, they are continually beat and forced to use drugs at most times for the coercion. So a lot of times, as anybody in a world like that, they don't live that long. So the 3 ways we're seeing their life end is by homicide, by drug overdose, and suicide, because they just can't take it anymore. How are they getting recruited? Like I said, most of it's done on social media. So again, don't be afraid to go to Target or to the mall. These children are not being snatched up from the Great Lakes Crossing Mall like you'll see online. Most of them are being recruited off of social media, and then they're being put out to the public on also social media. So most of the trafficking happens online, both the recruitment effort and then the sale. So we're seeing, everybody's heard of the escorting websites like Craigslist and Backpage. Those were the number 2 sites that we would see the sale for sex trafficking going on. The FBI shut down Craigslist and Backpage because of the fact that they were openly posting for sale human beings. So they shut them down. That doesn't mean that it stopped. The traffickers just made their own websites. So now we have a lot of escorting websites that are popping up online. We actually have one called Detroit Escorts. There's Moco Space, there's a bunch of different ones. And they still use Craigslist and Backpage because they are classified ads. They'll just find a different classification. So they're put under like dating instead of escorting. So there used to be an actual tab called escorts that you could click and buy a person. Now they're just kind of hiding it a little bit better, and so they're going under the guise of this is a date, but it's a date that you pay for. Who is recruiting? Like I said, a lot of times the trafficker is looking for youth that they already know, so a lot of times it'll be a family friend. It'll be somebody that they got introduced to. Some of these traffickers actually will have girls that work for them go out and bring their friends in, so the trafficker has more victims. So the recruitment might be a peer-to-peer. So one girl gets involved, she goes out and gets all her friends to come with her and get involved as well. And usually they're selling it to them like, hey, I have a friend, he's gonna have a party this weekend, let's all go to it. And the next thing you know, this is not a party, it is a sex trafficking party, and these girls are dragged into it with them. And some of them stay. Some of them stay because their home life is so broken that this life is better. And that's another sad reality of it. So we see all sorts of things, but the number 1 thing that we see is that the traffickers are posing as a boyfriend, so that the girls are getting boyfriended in, which is, it's really hard to see for these girls at first. I'm sure you can see how victimized they are to come in and think that this man who's given them all these gifts, that I'm sure that they loved him. Some of them, it might have been the first time they felt love in their life. And the next thing they know, they're forced to repay him by doing sex acts. So this can be really hard for these kids. You can see on here, just talking about the apps that we're talking about. This is a news article that I pulled offline. This was an endangered missing advisory that we did for a missing girl, a runaway. But we believe that she was involved in sex trafficking. And if you see here, it says that she left home after talking to somebody on the Kik Messenger app. So Kik Messenger is a social media platform that a lot of our youth are using. It's almost like the Facebook for kids. And that the traffickers know that. They know that it's heavily populated with youth using it, so it's prime recruitment grounds for them to pick up girls. So she met him on Kik. Next thing she knew, she was being sex trafficked. Who are the traffickers and the pimps? Again, remember how I said it can cross all racial boundaries, all ethnic boundaries, all religions. The traffickers can really be anybody, and I think that that's kind of another myth that we get. We think that the trafficker is always a man. Who can describe a pimp to me? Just take a stab at it. But like what you think of when you think pimp in your head? Creepy? Hustler?
Snoop Dogg.
Snoop Dogg, there you go. That's what I'm thinking. So like if you go to the Halloween store, like you want to be a pimp for Halloween, right? You're gonna wear what? Like a big coat, a feather boa, a giant hat with a feather, right? That's what we all have. I mean, that's what I was taught a pimp was. You know, a pimp is a specific look. You know, and it's kind of glorified, right? So if people dress up as it for Halloween, think of that. Like, how crazy is that? Like these terrible people, and people are like, I'm a pimp. You know, that's really what our culture believes a pimp looks like. And I'm trying to change the narrative of that. And I have, just to go to this. This is what we envision a pimp, right?
Yeah.
And the sad thing, this is actually a picture from one of our pimps that we arrested. And they glorify themselves as this too. So he actually like thought this is how he dressed, a lot of gold chains. But that's really what we think of. The sad reality of it is these two people were pimps. Look at that. This is in Michigan. These two people were arrested for sex trafficking. So this is the face of sex trafficking. You don't see any feathers, you don't see any hats, right? That's the reality of this. They can look just like you and I. It can be anybody. We have arrested women, good-looking, beautiful women that are pimping other women. We call them madams, but yes, that happens. We've seen youth pimp other youth. So the face of the trafficker can really be anybody. And remember how I said sometimes parents will even exploit their own children? I'm sure we all know, like, you don't need a license to parent. Sadly, if some parents have no morals, the children are a source of income for them. And we find them using their children as a source of income. They find them profitable, and they traffic them. So it can be any relationship, and it can be any look. So I'm just going to go back a little bit. So anybody that can exert control over a youth, and I have this kind of catered to for children involved in sex trafficking, but really, like I said, the victims can be anybody. They could be anybody that's profitable and vulnerable to a pimp. So it doesn't have to be youth. They're not always organized either. A lot of these people, I call them pickup pimps, but they don't have a background in it. They maybe had a good career and at some point found themselves needing income, and they turn to this. This is a very easy and profitable way to make money, and sadly that's why we see it happening so often. It's not always a criminal, it's not always organized. Both men and women, any ethnicity or race, it's really anybody that can benefit from a commercial sexual act, but it involves exploiting a person. So there is a crime involved in it. How much money are we talking about? Just so I can kind of give you an idea of it, a quota is just what the pimp expects their one girl to bring in a night. So he usually tells his girls they each have a quota, and it depends on how good they are and maybe how good they look. So you might have one that their quota is very low because they're not pulling in the clientele, and then they might have a really high dollar victim that will bring in more money, but each of them has money assigned to them that they have to bring in per day or per night. So the quota can often be more than $500. It could be thousands of dollars a night, depending on what it gets named. So if you're taking one, we'll call it prostitute at this point, but a victim, $500 a night, so her quote is $500. She does it every night because they don't get a day off. That's $3,500 a week. Remember, now she's not getting any of this money. This is going straight to the pimp. So $3,500 a week, tax-free, right? We're not paying our taxes on this. 52 weeks in a year, that's $182,000 a year. One girl. Do you think they just have one girl? No, that's why they have multiple girls. So you can imagine how much cash money these traffickers are bringing in. Is this profitable? Absolutely. Do you think that one girl could make $500 in a day? Easily. If you're running even $100 a job, which that's probably what I would say most girls will ask for, $100 to $150. That's 5 dates a day. That's easily attainable by these girls, and most of them do many, many more than that. So you can see how much money that we're talking about. I'm going to go through a case study just to really bring this home to you. This is a local case, so I tried to find one to bring it home for everybody here. This was a case that I personally worked, and this was last year, and this juvenile went missing in Saginaw, Michigan. Is that nearby? Okay, so we have a missing youth from Saginaw. How many do we have missing a week, roughly? So this is 1 of 1,000, right? Do you even think I'm paying attention to this? No, I mean, she's a runaway. She had run away before, so not her first time. Nobody even blinked an eye when this girl ran away. I mean, her parents did. They reported it. However, bedroom window was left open, everything about it looked like she snuck out of the window. She had run away before. She got reported. Law enforcement was investigating. Now, when I say it was investigating, do you think that they were out there scouring the streets for her since she was a runaway and she'd done it before? No. At that point, though, she was a 14-year-old. So in our unit, when we look at our missing juveniles, we actually have a line that we have to draw of who are we paying attention to and who we aren't. Sadly, the line is at 13. We look at 13 and below. Anything above that, and really it's just at 14 you have a lot more street smarts than a 9-year-old, right? So at 14, not that they're not vulnerable, but I have to draw the line in the sand somewhere. So we're not even looking at her in my unit, and we're the Missing Children's Clearinghouse. But with 1,000 cases a week, we have to triage what we look at. So we're not even aware that she's missing, besides the fact that she's in a database. So if law enforcement came across her, that we would see that she was missing. So how did I find out about it? I get all the tips and leads that come from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Has everybody heard of them? They're out in Alexandria, Virginia. Somebody called the hotline and left a tip about this 14-year-old that had run away. They said that she was being sex trafficked down in Dayton, Ohio. So now it's on my radar. So now I clearly know who I'm talking about. I call up to Saginaw, I get the report, and I put a plan into action. So I call our FBI team. Remember how I said we have all those FBI teams? I called the FBI team in Toledo. I said, hey, we have a tip on a 14-year-old down in Dayton. Can we go do a door? Does everybody know what that means in law enforcement terms? We're going to kick that door and find this kid. That's a good tip. So it had a name. It had exactly where she was at. It was just telling us, go get her. So we did. So I sent a team down in Dayton, Ohio. They went, they did the door. They did not find her. They found the male involved in the tip. They interviewed him. They believe he did have contact with this 14-year-old. In his statement, he said that he talks to hundreds of girls a day online, because that's where they're looking, right? This was a 30-something-year-old male, by the way, living in his mom's basement. He said, I have conversations with hundreds of girls a day, so he didn't remember her, but we're pretty sure that she was one of those 100. And he always makes sure that they're at least 16 before he'll talk to them. Now, is that inappropriate? He's 30-something, he's talking to 16-year-olds online. You know he's creeping, right? He's a creeper. We just didn't catch him in the act. So we had to let him go. So we go back though. So we still have this missing 14-year-old. We know that she probably is involved in sex trafficking now because of the tip. And we do believe she did have contact with him. However, she left all of her social media at home. She didn't bring a phone. We ended up taking her computers and her phone to dump them. The FBI started going through that. We actually had the FBI go to her junior high school and start interviewing all of the kids in her class. Who's a parent in here of maybe a school-age kid? Anybody? Would you be freaked out if the FBI came in and interviewed your kid? I would be too. I think that's crazy, but that's what we had to do. And in those interviews, one of her classmates admitted that the missing youth had contacted her on a new social media platform. Guess what one it was? Kik. She had made a new account in Kik, so we weren't finding it in all of her computer, because she had made a new account. So she contacted her friend and told her where she was at. She said, I'm in Wisconsin with this guy. We ended up getting a search warrant for the IP address that Kik account was hitting off of, and we did another door. And we found her locked in the bedroom of this guy. 52-year-old male. Met her the day that she went missing on Kik Messenger. He posed as a youth male. I'm sure his profile picture looked something like Justin Bieber, and engaged her in conversation. He actually drove all the way from Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin to Saginaw, Michigan that same day, showed up in front of her house at 3 o'clock in the morning and enticed her to crawl out of her bedroom window to meet with him. On her side of the story, that all happened, but when she crawled out of her bedroom window to meet Justin Bieber, she met him instead. And she was like, oh, hell no. She did not choose to go with him. He did abduct her. He said, if I came all this way, I'd take you with me. He snatched her. So remember, I said less than 1%, but this is one of them. Snatched her up, drove right back to Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. He locked her in his bedroom for 5 days. She would never admit what happened. I think we can all assume what happened. But we were able to rescue her. And had we not gotten that tip, I don't know what would have happened to her. Do you think he would have brought her back? Do you think he would have dropped her off on a street corner? Maybe. I mean, that's best case scenario. But I think he probably would have at some point killed her and silenced her. Craziest thing about this whole case I just told you about, was there any sex trafficking involved?
No.
He never trafficked her. He did transport a juvenile across state lines, which is a 20-year mandatory felony, but he never sex trafficked her. So this isn't even a sex trafficking case, but you can see how it could happen, right? He just chose not, he just kept her for himself. But this is how this happens, though. This is how these youth, how easily it can happen. And she was one of those 1,000 a week. And we just got very lucky that one of her classmates called in that tip, that she knew that she was involved in sex trafficking. So how can you guys help as a community? There is several nonprofits involved in sex trafficking. The number one national nonprofit is called the Polaris Project. And that is where we get all those statistics from. So like we're number 11 right now based on the Polaris Project. They also run the 1-800 number, the 1-888 number, I should say, national hotline for sex trafficking. That all goes to Polaris, and then Polaris actually tips out to the FBI in each state. So all of our tips coming from this national hotline go right into the Detroit FBI and then get disseminated across the state. So Polaris Project, if you ever look it up online, it has really good statistics. There's also the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC. They're also a nonprofit out in Alexandria. My unit works very closely with them. So Michigan, having the Missing Children's Clearinghouse, we're the sole report to the National Center. So it comes right into my unit. They also have the national hotline for missing children, which that one was used in the case I told you about. They also collect data on missing and exploited children and provide training to law enforcement. And then locally, so we talked about SOAP Detroit, which Tressa is involved in. So SOAP is Save Our Adolescents from Prostitution. That is a local nonprofit in Michigan, and they deal solely with sex trafficking. So they go out and actually have volunteers go to the hotels where we know sex trafficking has happened. I can guarantee you it's probably happened in this hotel before. It happens everywhere. It happens in good hotels, it happens in bad hotels. It doesn't really matter, but it does happen. So SOAP is across Michigan. They have an office in Monroe, and I think they have another office somewhere down in Southeast Michigan. I'm not sure where their second office is, but you can find them online, and they accept volunteers to come and help. And then we have Missing in Michigan. Has anybody heard of Missing in Michigan? Missing in Michigan is another nonprofit helping missing persons of any ages in any situation. So not just human trafficking, but any person that goes missing. And I started Missing in Michigan back in 2011. So I use that as a way, my day never stopped at the end of my shift. And I found that I needed to do something more for the community, so I started Missing in Michigan. And we hold the annual Missing Persons Day in Michigan every year, which is a day of reflection for the family members that have somebody missing. And we also run several events that collect DNA from the family members in hopes that we can provide them answers. We're having one next week down in Detroit at the Wayne County Morgue. Sadly, a lot of our missing people end up as unidentified human remains in the morgues. And so we have a day where we actually asked family members that are missing people currently to come in and make reports and donate their DNA so we can try to find them answers, because that's a very real end for some of their cases. So if you want anything or volunteer, donate to these organizations. They can both be found online. And then local law enforcement. So we have a couple different human trafficking initiatives. We have the FBI teams, which are mostly down in Southeast Michigan. We have SEMTech, but we also have a team in Flint, and we have a team in Grand Rapids. So they're kind of set across the state, and I use them for pretty much all of my human trafficking tips. So if I need a team to go out and follow up, I'm calling the FBI teams. And they're task forces, meaning that they're made up of a bunch of different local agencies, local, county, state, and federal. There's also HSI, so Homeland Security has a human trafficking initiative. And then the Attorney General's office has a commission on human trafficking, which means on the prosecution side. We usually prosecute our cases through the Attorney General's office. If you have any questions, this is my contact. That is my personal cell phone number. So please let me know if you guys want more training for the community, any more presentations, ways to volunteer. If you find that you have a problem within your community involving human trafficking, please let me know. I can get the resources available to address it. And does anybody just have any questions? Go ahead.
I do.
Sure.
From the downriver area to Detroit, who would our contact be down there?
Well, SEMTech is probably the closest. If you're talking about law enforcement, the FBI team in Detroit. But you can contact my office and we can get you in touch with them.
Because I work with a group of kids at our high school in Lincoln Park, and it's that age.
Yep.
And I think that's who we need to be getting this word out to.
I think the best bet for school-age kids is we have, in my department, we have what we call community service troopers, and they go into the schools and do presentations. I would have one of the community service troopers in your area, which is probably the Metro South Post. So I would contact the Metro South Post, and I think, trying to think of the trooper's name, Austin DeClerc is his name. he would probably be the one that would come and do a presentation in the school.
Okay, I'll get,
Sure.
I have your information
Yeah.
up there and I'll hook it up.
Go ahead.
So, this organization, SOAP,
Yep.
are there similar organizations in other states? Because I'm from Ohio.
I don't believe so. So SOAP is very unique in that they actually take bars of soap, and that's kind of where the acronym came from, and they put a sticker on it that has the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And what they do is they try to get the front desk personnel at hotels, if they see a trafficking possible situation, they try to slide the bar of soap to the girl. You know, like it's a toiletry, but it has the human trafficking hotline on it.
I think Nesta and her group, or Tressa, I'm sorry, and her group went out to California. Was it for the Super Bowl?
Yep,
In
they
California.
did.
And they handed out, so they will go to different,
They will go, yeah.
to different states. But she's a trooper. I don't know if she's still in the Girl Coast. No, she's up in
She's
Detroit.
at Suntech, yeah, she's
Okay.
in Detroit now.
But she was at the Monroe Coast, and we had her do a couple presentations, and she's just an awesome.
Yeah, she is.
Really and truly is. But I know that her group goes out to all the different when they have big events. They go to the different hotels to get bars of soap out, and she was very proactive in getting the stickers on the rest area,
Yeah.
the rest area restrooms and tennis.
Have you ever been in a restroom and there's been a sticker on the door, ladies? I don't think this happens in the men's. Okay, does it? That's great. Yeah, so a lot of times you go in the restroom and on the inside of the door, there'll be a sticker that it says, are you being sex trafficked or are you a victim of human trafficking, with the hotline number to call. So that's something that SOAP does. So they're kind of unique to that. I've never heard of another organization that goes to hotels and gives soap out. It's really a neat concept though. And they also will take flyers of current missing people in the area and show them to the clerks and ask, have they been here? And every once in a while we'll get a good tip out of that where actually someone would be like, yeah, she's in room 103 right now. and that's real. And then we'll try to get law enforcement there. So we work hand in hand with them. Go ahead.
Detective Sargeant. I'm from Indiana. So would my FBI unit there, we have one.
Yep.
If I make direct contact, would they probably have someone in that area that would help us with this presentation?
I'm sure, yeah.
I mean, you see, there are 18,000 exchange sites across the country. That's 18,000 more eyes
All right.
we have out there. So I think this is something that every region and every club should be looking at across the country.
Sure.
It's been great, thank you.
Yeah. It's very eye-opening once you see kind of how it happens. Does everybody have a better idea of how this really happens? Has it changed your view? Because I think everybody kind of has always thought that sex trafficking, like it says, like you get sacked in the parking lot on your way on a Target. And that's not how it happens at all. You know, this is really a recruitment effort, and these traffickers are looking for specific people to get involved. But it really can happen to anybody. It's really scary.
This book is quite old now, but Teresa Flores' book, The Slave Across the Street,
Yep.
is a fantastic read about what actually happened in north of Detroit,
Yeah.
Birmingham, Bloomfield.
Yep, and she works for SOAP. So she started.
She started so.
Yeah, so Teresa
Flores.
Yep, Teresa Flores. She's been the speaker at my Missing Persons Day before. She's excellent. She is a former victim of sex trafficking from right here in Michigan. And she wrote a book called The Slave Across the Street, which is a great read.
For the local community, through Underground Railroad, we do have the Human Trafficking Task Force. So if you need a speaker from there, that's the Underground Railroad that has that commission right here in Savannah. So
Yeah, and there's a lot of resources now coming about for human trafficking. My organization, Missing in Michigan, we do community-based presentations, but it would probably be me just off duty. My organization is a little more geared to the emotional support of families of missing people, but you can see that they marry up to a lot of these trafficking cases because a lot of the girls involved go missing at some point because they're being sheltered by the trafficker.
There's a lot more information today than there was 20 years ago, at least made available. And with computers and technology and phones, we know we still have a lot of kids in their bedrooms at night with their computers on or on their phones. Are there apps and other things that you would recommend for parents to consider to monitor without overstepping the privacy of their child, but
Yes.
making sure that they're protecting them at the same time?
Yeah, there are some apps that you can get for phones. There's one called, I believe it's called Watchdog 365 maybe, and it's a pay-for app, and there's a subscription. I think it's like $25 a month for this monitoring software that basically you put on your child's phone, and it mirrors everything that they're doing to you. Sneaky. But if you want to really stay on top of it and be covert in your actions, it's a great app, and it's well worth your money, especially if you just want to, know what's going on, but not be all up in their business. Some call that snooping. I call it parenting. You hear that? Yeah. My kids they're so screwed. Yeah, two parents that are cops, yeah. But
Are you involved in the Half the Sky program?
no, I haven't heard of that one.
It's a book written about sex trafficking, and it's in our community. We have a gal who's part of this, and they're part of a big coalition throughout the state. I was wondering.
I haven't had contact with them yet. But
What are the levels of the other type of trafficking in this, servitude or labor? Is that
The labor trafficking?
That's pretty prevalent also?
it's not as prevalent as the sex trafficking, but it does happen, and it's a little more underground. But come on, we all know that this happens. And it usually attacks the ethnic populations. So we've seen it everywhere from nail salons, hair braiding places, farms. I think that was probably like the first introduction to labor trafficking, is migrant workers that are being forced without pay to work or very, very little pay. We see it in restaurants, but a lot of them they're very ethnically based, and unfortunately a lot of those ethnic groups are very closed off to law enforcement. And that's why we're not getting as high of statistics. I think it's probably happening maybe even more than sex trafficking, realistically, but we're never gonna have those statistics because they go unreported. Because most of those people involved in labor trafficking are so scared that they're gonna be deported or that they've done something wrong, that they're gonna go to jail, and that's what their traffickers, they use that same force and coercion on them, but it's not, it's more of, you're gonna get sent home. Do you want that? Then you don't talk to the police. So we have, and a lot of the workers involved in sex trafficking have limited English and limited resources like a phone. So they can't make the reports. They don't have a car. They don't have a phone. They don't speak English. So how are they coming in and reporting that? So it's really up to the community and the eyes and ears of the community. But unfortunately, those groups are very closed off a lot of times because of their ethnic backgrounds. Maybe they don't associate outside of their ethnic boundaries. And so it's contained in these little pockets. But sometimes you'll see that a youth will friend somebody from within that pool and know about it. And know that their friend's parents aren't paid at work, and that they have to work, 100-hour weeks, and they live in the basement of the person that owns the establishment that they work at. So they live with the trafficker, they're transported to and from work every day by the trafficker, and they're not paid. The only thing that they get is a place to live, and they're allowed to be in the United States per the trafficker. Is that any way to live? So that's what those debt bondage and slavery or involuntary servitude people are looking at, labor trafficking.
Wasn't there a case of that in Detroit a few years ago where they were living in the basement of the home?
And the house burned down?
And the house burned down,
Yes.
yeah.
So that one specifically was a Chinese restaurant, and the owner kept all of his Chinese workers living in his basement. I think there was it was an unreal number for one basement, in a house in Novi. And the house burned to the ground and they all died in the basement. And that was absolutely, so we see it in, when I say nail salons, is everybody, all the ladies in here, have you ever gone to a Vietnamese run nail salon? So a lot of times we're seeing that the workers are not being paid. And that's not a broad stroke across all of them, because there are obviously ones that operate fully in compliance with the law, but we do see in a lot of those ethnic-based salons and restaurants, tanning salons, all sorts of different places. Asian massage parlors, yes. Yes, we're seeing some labor trafficking.
I went to a seminar on human trafficking, and they said, might be a myth, the number one human trafficking place in Michigan is Mackinac Island. Is that true?
No, I don't think that's true. I think that's a myth because they do have a lot of ethnic minorities that work on the island, but I believe that all of them are paid.
Right.
And that they're not here against their will. So I think that started from somebody probably just seeing that there was a large pool of ethnic minorities working, and they thought this would be a great thing to start up online. So
There's
no.
100 of us that have heard that.
Yeah, I think all of our friends up in Mackinac Islands that run the hotels run them, and they're paying their employees, and that they're not held there against their will. Yeah.
There was a post on social media that they rescued 133 or 153 children in one day. Is that true?
It is true.
It is fabulous.
Who do you think ran that sleep?
Oh,
So that, remember how I told you 1,000 juveniles go missing every week? So how hard do you think it would be to find 123 of them? It's not, especially in Wayne County. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. So we just gathered, we had over 100 law enforcement officers involved in that though, and we gave them a stack of files on missing kids. Remember how I said too that most missing kids are not endangered? They're just out not following the rules. They just went out and found them. That was it. 123 in an 8-hour period. It was honestly, I wouldn't say it was like the easiest thing I've ever done, but that was just like one day at work for me. And yeah, national headlines, we were in Rolling Stone magazine about that, and people just could not believe that. It just blew their minds. But when you're looking at the amount of kids that we have during any one given time, finding 123 of them with over 100 law enforcement officers is not hard. That's like one a person. They gotta go find one of these kids. And a lot of them were exactly where they should be. They were back at school or they were back at home. A lot of times what we're seeing is the families that report them never re-report that they come home. So we as law enforcement still have this missing record that we have to get eyes on those kids to clear it. And we're, of course, we're not gonna take the record out without knowing. So we went out and we found 123 of them in a day.
is there some rehabilitation program for the children that cannot go back to a home or foster care?
Yeah, we have a lot of resources from the Department of Health and Human Services, but the kids, it depends on what situation. So that day that we ran that sweep, some of those kids were found in deplorable conditions. And maybe they weren't in foster care, and maybe they should be. And so that's when CPS gets called and gets involved in the case. The child gets removed from the home and ends up in foster care. But yes, there are resources for that, and that's how, in a situation like that sweep, we enacted a lot of that. Because the kids, they probably shouldn't have been in that home in the first place, because it wasn't even worthy of them living in it. So yeah, we do have resources.
That was kind of my question too. I was just wondering how often, you said you have repeat runaways, do you step in and go, wait a minute?
Yeah, so
basically that's kind of.
It is, I think we could put more resources towards that. So remember how many people I told you I have in my unit? So there's 3 people and over 1,000 kids missing a week. So we're not capturing all of those kids that are truly in need. And I believe the same thing, that why are they running? Like, I mean, Dorothy ran away in A Wizard of Oz, but it's not something that I think kids should do all the time. I think it's part of the juvenile process at times. However, it shouldn't be an everyday occurrence. So what is the problem? So one of the things that my unit did is we made a form, because I work for the government, right? I made a form. So all the troopers, if they have a runaway case, when they recover the runaway, meaning the kid comes home, they have to go back out and interview the kid. Why did you run? And it's a list of questions to elicit if they had been sex trafficked or if they're being abused in the home. It's a way for the kid, they separate the child from the environment and interview them about why did you run, who did you stay with, who paid you, where did you sleep, how did you get your meals? And those type of questions elicit from that kid, because kids aren't always super smart. They might say, well, I stayed at this guy's house. Well, who's that? You know, and it might elicit a conversation where we can rescue a kid from a sex trafficking situation. So now in our state, at least the state police cases, we run every kid that gets recovered after they're run through a list of questions. And I think that is helping, because it's identifying those cases if they tell the truth. Yeah, if they tell the truth. A lot of them, no, I'll see the sheets come in. No, not answered. Because kids are kids. But at least it is giving them an opportunity to speak if they need to.
Do a lot of high schools and middle schools, elementaries take advantage of your programs?
I don't go into the schools. I let our community service troopers do that. I do more of the community-based outside of the schools. But I think a lot of the schools are opening it up, and some even at a younger age. I don't know that it's appropriate at her age to have a presentation. Of course, my kids have seen it. But I think my kids are going to end up being probably working for the FBI or in some capacity from what they see at home. But I think it's more appropriate towards the end of junior high to start doing programs like this in the schools, because that is really the recruitment age that I'm seeing. But yeah, some schools aren't open to it yet because of the content, you know, but it's very real, and this is really happening, so I think that they probably should at least have the conversation with them.
I think in the middle school it should be done, because our kids are already having sex in
Yeah,
middle school.
exactly.
Right in school.
Yeah. True. Any other questions? I'll be here for a couple minutes after too if anybody wants to approach me. So thank you for your time. Thank you.